There are moments in modern history that don't just echo through the halls of power. They shake the very foundation of the global order. Today, the world witnessed one of those moments. Under the cover of night, America launched precision airstrikes against what it claims were secret Iranian nuclear sites. No prior warning, no room for discussion. Just the unmistakable roar of American warplanes and the cold certainty of satellite-guided missiles. Washington insists these were necessary steps, that Iran had crossed a line, stockpiling enriched uranium, hiding operations from the world, and moving ever closer to building a nuclear weapon. According to them, the world couldn't risk another North Korea, especially not in the Middle East, especially not with Iran. So they acted fast, hard, and with deadly accuracy. But what they didn't script, what they didn't seem to prepare for, was Iran's reaction. It didn't fold, it didn't run. It didn't ask for mercy. Instead, from the crumbled remains of its reactors and ruined labs came something the West so often misreads: defiant pride. Across Tehran, Qam, and Isfahan, people gathered. They didn't chant in fear. They shouted with determination, not because they want war, but because they refused to be bullied into submission. This wasn't just a military action. It was a message delivered through fire, written in explosions. But Iran responded with a message of its own, etched in history, carried in culture. We will not kneel before empires. This is a country that has withstood decades of crippling sanctions, covert cyber attacks, political isolation, and the assassination of its scientists. A nation like that doesn't break in one night. If anything, it becomes stronger, more committed. What happens next isn't simply about uranium levels or IAEA inspections. This is about two powers colliding on a stage far larger than either one. It's about dominance, about narrative, about whose story shapes the world's understanding. Is Iran secretly preparing for nuclear conflict? Or is it just a nation defending its right to self-determination? Is America acting as the world's protector, or as the lone sheriff of a chaotic frontier? Let's be honest, every move now has a price. Markets are shaking, oil prices are spiking, alliances are under pressure, and somewhere far from any cameras, soldiers are preparing for what might come next. Because the question is no longer if there will be a response. It's when, how, and how much it will cost. America may have struck first, but in this unpredictable and dangerous power game, drawing first blood doesn't mean securing victory. Iran stands tall. Not just because of military assets, but because of an idea. The idea of independence, of survival, of resistance. That idea cannot be destroyed with bombs. It cannot be erased with sanctions. It cannot be silenced with speeches. So while the headlines shout about missiles and destroyed compounds, let's not ignore the deeper truth. This is no longer only about nuclear capability. This is about identity. And in a battle over identity, there are no clear winners, only long-lasting consequences the world will carry for decades. The US airstrikes on Iran's hidden nuclear sites were not just military decisions, they were global signals. In the early morning hours, American forces launched a surprise assault targeting multiple sites within Iranian territory. According to US intelligence, these were advanced nuclear development locations, far more sophisticated than previously acknowledged. They were not the usual suspects, Natanz or Fordow facilities that have long been monitored by global agencies. These were newer, deeper, better hidden, underground, masked as civilian research sites. The mission was carefully prepared, every movement calculated. It wasn't just about setting back Iran's nuclear program. It was about showing the world that the United States can still reach any corner of the globe, still act with precision, and still project overwhelming power. This wasn't retaliation, it was preempt. Washington based its decision on claims that Iran had rapidly increased uranium enrichment in ways never publicly declared. That it posed an urgent threat not only to the region, but to allies around the world. For months, intelligence agencies had reportedly watched movements of high-grade centrifuges, seen encrypted communications among scientists tied to Iran's military, and tracked strange heat patterns in isolated compounds. The information, they say, painted a grim picture. Iran was crossing nuclear red lines, this time in the shadows and with remarkable technical ability. American stealth aircraft entered Iranian airspace under total radio silence. Electronic warfare jets flew alongside them, disabling radar and scrambling communications. Then bunker-busting bombs were dropped, capable of reaching deep underground. In mere minutes, explosions rocked the desert. Satellite images began confirming what human sources were already reporting: direct hits. Smoke clouds, collapsed roofs, mangled structures. Power was knocked out. Iran's enrichment activities were thrown into confusion, but the most shocking part of the strike wasn't the technology, it was the silence. There were no warnings, no last-minute demands, no threats delivered through diplomats. It was swift, unspoken, final. And with that, the US signaled it no longer viewed Iran's nuclear ambitions as a topic for the conference table. The threat, they said, had grown too great. The moment for talk had ended. Inside Washington, officials stood firm. The White House released a short but strong statement, claiming solid proof Iran was on the brink of creating weapons grade material. Without intervention, they said, Iran would have had a working bomb within months. They claimed the operation was not an act of war, but a necessary step to prevent future catastrophe. By striking now, they believed they had removed the threat before it fully materialized. Reactions in Congress were mixed. Some praised the mission, calling it bold leadership. Others raised alarms, concerned about the lack of consultation with lawmakers and the possibility of a wider war. The fear wasn't just Iran's retaliation, it was the precedent. What does this say to other nations watching? What does it signal to North Korea, to China, to Russia? What rules now guide global military engagement? The Pentagon stayed quiet. No details on casualties, no list of targets. But experts suggested this was one of the most advanced military operations in years, combining real-time surveillance, cyber disruption, air dominance and coordination with regional assets. Some believe the mission involved help from Gulf-based allies, possibly flight permissions or intelligence support. If true, this adds another layer of complexity. Who was involved? Who approved? Who might be in Iran's sights next? Around the world, reactions came quickly. Israel applauded the strike, saying they had long warned about the need for action, claiming diplomacy had failed and only emboldened Tehran. But European partners reacted with caution. France and Germany urged restraint, fearing a regional war. The UN Security Council gathered for an emergency meeting, with Russia and China strongly condemning the US for what they called a reckless, one-sided move. To Washington, though, the logic was simple. If a nation secretly builds weapons of mass destruction and hides them behind a civilian mask, then its right to sovereignty becomes void. Iran, they argue, had pushed past that limit. It wasn't just a strike. It was a calculated decision to show force, not only to Iran, but to every other nation considering similar ambitions. It was a reminder that beneath all the agreements and dialogue lies something more raw military strength and the will to use it when lines are crossed. But Iran didn't respond with surrender. It answered with fire in its eyes and resolve in its voice. The airstrikes may have damaged structures and halted operations, but they didn't shake the nation's spirit. Within hours, Iranian media broadcast footage of leaders holding emergency meetings. Military forces were mobilized. People filled city squares, waving flags, chanting slogans, declaring unity. It was a deliberate show of strength, not panic. Iran's government issued statements, not as victims but as a proud people defending their homeland. They called the attack illegal. They said it was proof of Western arrogance, America playing judge and executioner without process or law. They didn't portray weakness. They painted resistance. Scenes of destroyed labs and twisted metal were shown, not as defeat, but as fuel for national unity. They turned the story around. It wasn't about bombs, it was about the continued will of a country that refuses to be shaped by outside hands. Iran doesn't deny its desire for technological progress, but it insists on its right to develop independently. To Washington, that's a threat. To Tehran, that's a promise. What happens next could reshape the entire region. Retaliation seems almost certain. But in what form? And how wide will the ripples reach? Already military units across the Middle East are on high alert. Embassies are tightening security. Global energy prices are jumping. And the world waits for the next move, for the next strike, for the next escalation. Because what began in silence under the shadow of night now screams across borders. It's no longer just a war over uranium. It's a battle over pride, over independence, over who gets to draw the lines of acceptable power. And in that fight, the costs are never small, and the scars may last for generations. But to stir fury, pride, and a deep sense of purpose, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei appeared on national television. Calm and composed, his voice steady. He didn't scream threats or make wild promises of instant revenge. Instead, he spoke of honor, of Iran's long resistance, and of a history that shows Iran always survives, always adapts no matter the storm. That calm tone was not by accident. It was chosen with care. This wasn't about acting out in rage. It was about reminding the world that Iran thinks in decades, not days, that it doesn't crumble under pressure. It regroups, it adjusts, and it waits for the right time, the right method to strike back, not just with weapons, but with politics, influence, and culture. The Revolutionary Guard, Iran's powerful military force, moved quickly into the spotlight. Images began spreading, anti-aircraft batteries being moved, missile units going on alert, and warships adjusting positions in the Persian Gulf. This wasn't necessarily preparation for full-scale war. It was a message, a warning, a way of showing that Iran, even if hit, is still armed, still in control, and still prepared to answer if pushed further. Yet even stronger than the military message was the deeper story Iran leaned on, its national identity. For years, Iran has portrayed itself as the target of Western interference. Coups, sanctions, cyber attacks, assassinations, and now airstrikes. This was a perfect moment to bring that old story back into the spotlight. The government didn't have to convince every citizen about nuclear technology. It only needed to convince them that their land was under attack, once again, by a long-time enemy. In that light, resistance becomes more than just patriotic. It becomes holy. In city after city, nationalism came pouring out. Huge crowds filled the streets, not to criticize their leaders, but to show unity against foreign attacks. Young men offered to join the Basij militia. Women waved flags from rooftops. Religious leaders gave sermons about courage and sacrifice. National prayers were called. State media worked fast, turning every destroyed building into a symbol. Every crater was described as a place of sacrifice. Every damaged lab became a rallying point. The message was clear. Iran is not defeated. It is rising. On the world stage, Iran's tone shifted slightly. At the United Nations, its diplomats strongly condemned the US strikes. They accused Washington of breaking international law and causing more instability in an already dangerous region. But they didn't speak with desperation. Their words were sharp and clear, about sovereignty, about justice, and about standing tall under pressure. Iran's allies like Syria and Hezbollah quickly expressed support. Iraq condemned the use of its airspace. Even countries usually not close to Iran spoke out, worrying that a single unchecked attack could throw the entire region into chaos. Tehran used these voices to build its argument that it's not a reckless nation, but one being punished for standing its ground. Yet behind the calm speeches was a quiet promise, an unspoken warning that this attack would not go unanswered. Iranian commanders didn't give timelines or details. They didn't need to. They only said that consequences were coming. That payback might arrive through cyber warfare, through allies in other countries, through diplomatic pressure, or with surprise military action. But it would come. That was clear. Iran's strength has never only come from its weapons. It lies in its ability to take hits and turn them into energy for resistance. The strikes may have been a surprise, but they didn't break Iran's core. If anything, they gave the regime something it often needs, an outside enemy to blame, to unite people, to justify tighter controls at home. What looked like a loss on paper quickly became a powerful tool in the political playbook. Iran's reply to the strikes was not confusion or chaos. It was order. It was focus. It was the determined face of a country that has built its identity on surviving storms. This wasn't about pride in missiles. It was about pride in endurance. Iran knows how to take the first punch and then tell a story about why that punch only made it stronger. The US attack on Iran's secret nuclear sites didn't just shake Tehran. It echoed across the world. In a matter of hours, capitals from Moscow to London, Tel Aviv to Beijing were holding emergency meetings, trying to understand what had just happened, what it meant, and how it might spread. This wasn't just a military act. It was a political quake, shifting alliances, shaking economies, and tearing open old wounds. In Washington, leaders called it a smart, targeted operation. But in Europe, the mood was different. NATO partners were caught by surprise. Most hadn't been told ahead of time. France and Germany, long involved in diplomacy with Iran, issued strong warnings. They said the strike might have killed off any chance for talks. That years of effort trying to rebuild the nuclear deal had been undone in minutes. These countries had worked hard to keep Iran talking to avoid war, and now the US had acted alone, making those efforts look weak or irrelevant. European leaders worried this new approach meant deals and diplomacy were no longer respected. That force had replaced discussion. Russia responded as expected, with fierce criticism. The Kremlin called the strike an act of aggression, blaming the US for pushing the region toward war just to gain control over energy routes. Russia warned that this would not be ignored. They hinted at stronger ties with Iran, maybe even sending weapons or intelligence. Their navy was put on alert. Satellites began watching American forces in the Gulf. For Moscow, defending Iran was also a way to challenge American power. China also pushed back. Beijing said the US had made things worse and demanded a UN meeting. Trade talks between China and the US were paused. More than that, China hinted it might start buying Iranian oil again, ignoring American sanctions. That move alone would shift the global balance. It said clearly that China might side with Iran in a long conflict, not just in words, but in action. In the Middle East, the temperature rose sharply. Israel quickly backed the strike. Their leaders called it necessary, saying they had warned about Iran for years. Missile defenses were activated. Troops were moved. For Israel, the danger was not the US action, but what might come next from Iran or its allies. And those allies began to move. Hezbollah in Lebanon, loyal to Iran, started shifting fighters. Militias in Iraq warned that American bases could be targeted. In Yemen, Houthi rebels made threats of their own. The quiet battles being fought in shadows across the region were now close to bursting into full-scale war. Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE reacted with caution. On one hand, they welcomed the blow against their rivals. On the other, they knew they could be hit next. Oil fields, cities, ports, everything was suddenly at risk. Emergency meetings were held. Foreign workers began leaving key sites. These nations didn't want war, but they knew it might be coming, whether they did or not. Financial markets reacted instantly. Oil prices jumped, stocks fell. Investors ran to gold and the US dollar for safety. Insurance costs for shipping through the Gulf shot up. New energy forecasts were written. Everyone started planning for what might happen if oil supplies are cut or if war closes the Strait of Hormuz. At the United Nations, the debate was sharp. The US said it had acted legally to stop an urgent nuclear threat. Iran called it an act of war. Other nations were split. Some asked for calm. Others gave weak statements. A few said nothing at all. The Security Council was stuck. The US blocked any resolution that questioned the strike. Russia and China blocked anything that supported it. Deadlock. Behind the scenes, phone lines buzzed. Ministers, generals, diplomats, all trying to understand how big this crisis might become. Would Iran respond in a few days or wait for months? Would it strike directly or use allies? No one knew for sure. But everyone agreed. The world had changed. Every country began rethinking its policy, not just toward Iran, not just toward the US, but toward the deeper rift this event exposed, between East and West, between force and diplomacy, between old alliances and new power struggles. What was destroyed in the Iranian desert may have been a hidden nuclear facility. But what was shaken across the globe was much bigger, the fragile hope that powerful nations still played by common rules. That strikes would only come after talks failed. That peace could be managed through deals. Now, all of that looks uncertain, and in that uncertainty, danger grows.